Today is the 5th day of Tevet and the 28th, 29th of December? 29th of December. And we're continuing with our discussion of Parshas Vayigash, the Torah portion of this week. And last time we talked about a little bit about the different levels of prophecy and how in Egypt they had some version of the Torah, of the wisdom that had been collected until that time, but it wasn't yet the level that Moses received when he received the Torah. And that was one of the reasons the Rebbe said that exile was worse and more difficult than all the other exiles after, because there was no Torah. And yet, they still had a yeshiva, they still had a place of study. What does this mean? We said it means that even if God has not revealed himself to you, you still have a duty to pursue God.
You had some people that revealed him.
No, it was all due to their... What?
To some people, Hashem revealed himself.
No, not really. It was all pursuit of God, but it wasn't a revelation that came down saying, here's the Torah. Mm-hmm. That was a collected wisdom that they had collected until that time. It was inspired by the divine, but it wasn't a revelation from the divine. And that's a very big difference. That's also one of the things that people don't understand regarding usually the difference between Torah and all the other wisdoms of the world. Because even when there is divine wisdom in other places, we accept that there's wisdom there, but there's no Torah. What do we mean by Torah? That there's no instruction. And that's the critical thing that makes the Torah different. Why? Because when there's this instruction, there is relationship in both directions. You could say that normally the wisdom that people acquire, even about godly things, is the wisdom of man searching for God. But it's not yet a two-way relationship. The relationship becomes two-way, and it becomes complete when God also says, and here's what I want from you. This is how I want us to connect. I just had a long conversation with somebody about this. But people don't realize that we anthropomorphize God very much because we don't have any other way to relate. So we have to say, how is this for us? And then we say, well, it's similar for him. But when God created the world, he created it by definition in a state which would eventually require the world to search for answers. Meaning the world was created to begin with problems. Right? That was always a big question by the philosophers. If God is perfect, why is the world not perfect? So the Jewish answer to that is very simple. Well, he tried perfect worlds, didn't work. Because if you have a perfect life, you have no need for the relationship anymore. The only reason you would have the need for the relationship is because something is missing or something is broken. So what Moses brought down was on the premise that man needs God. And God needs man because he needs a relationship just as much. He didn't like the other worlds, the perfect worlds that he created, because they were independent, completely independent. They didn't need him. It's very interesting. When Moses goes up to Shemaim, the Gemara, the Talmud in Shabbos says that the angels wanted to push him out. What was their argument? They said, why should you receive the Torah? The Torah is God's greatest possession. Why would humans need it? You're going to ruin it. So God said to answer them.
Do you have a mother and a father?
And so he says, do you have a mother and a father? All our problems start from our mother and father, right? Do you have wives? Do you have children? Do you have an evil inclination? It says the Torah doesn't make any sense if you don't have these problems, if you don't have these issues. These are human issues. God created it to begin with this way because that would require us to establish a relationship. And the relationship being two-way means that there can be wisdom which comes from us to him, our search for him. But there has to be an answer, which is the Torah coming down and establishing the relationship from him to us. And then, that's also
another issue which you haven't mentioned, which is that it was only when Hashem gave the Torah publicly that man was able to initiate or make changes which became permanent. Before then, all
right,
the
and
philosophical
that's a result of it.
Right.
The moment that there's instruction, so there's also the ability to change reality. So, again, this is, so he says, nonetheless, you should still pursue human wisdom, even divinely inspired human wisdom, even if you don't have Torah. So if you don't have instruction, for instance, is not born a Jew, he doesn't have instruction, because the Torah really instructs only Jews. It gives some instruction to non-Jews also, right? They have some instruction. It says, but even if you don't have the full instruction set, right, then you should still pursue the divine wisdom. And that's what they did in Egypt. And exactly what you just said is the answer to a question that begs itself here, which is, if they had no Torah, so what did it mean that they set up a house of instruction? They had instructions regarding the 7 Noahide laws, which are really 90, which are really very many. And about those things they had to rule. In the way that Yudah ruled about Tamar, that he had to, she had to be burnt because she'd committed adultery and so on. So there are many, many things that govern the lives of non-Jews as well. And those need instruction also. Okay, so we're up to chapter 7 here, page 85. B'Gemara yesh diyun. The Gemara has a very interesting discussion. Where is it worse for a person to work? In a place that has promiscuity, where there are houses of, how would you say it in a semi-clean, of? No, that's the Avodah Zarah. How would you say Zanot?
Immorality.
Okay, immorality, promiscuity. Which is worse? So should it be in where there is improper sexual conduct, or where there is idolatry? Which one is worse? So he says, the question that comes up is, if a person sees these immoral sexual acts, that already blemishes him, because he can't help not thinking about it, and it hurts him. But to walk near a place of idol worship, what's the big deal? It doesn't mean anything. הטעם של ראייה אינו שייך לכאן, שהרי אין רואים דבר פרט לעצים ואבנים. החטאם הוא כל דבר משפיע על האוויר שמסביב לו. ובמקום בו נמצאת טומאה, יש באוויר המשכה של טומאה, והאוויר זה עלול להשפיע על האדם. So he says, it's not a question of whether he sees the idols or doesn't. Really, that doesn't cause any harm. But the atmosphere is impure. Where there is impurity, the air around it is impure. And that is a very important thing to know, because there are systems by the non-Jews that are impure. Not just that they're not Torah. Really, they don't have a relationship with God, that's one thing. But there are systems that go and look for impure forces. They tried to do this. So the most famous one is Reiki, which was entirely built on false and idolatrous practices. And then they turned it into like some kind of channeling of energy. And unfortunately, it's a lot of people who, first of all, don't know what it is, and they just believe everything that they're told. They say, "Oh, no, we don't do this anymore. We don't think of these gods before we heal." But it doesn't matter, because the atmosphere around this is the atmosphere of idolatry. The same is true of yoga. Yoga has the same issue. Yoga is a word you can't even say. We say it because otherwise people won't understand what we're talking about. I can't say the Y-O-G-A. But that has the atmosphere. This is what the Rebbe is explaining here. It has the atmosphere of impurity. So if you go and engage in it, even you come and say, I don't do any of the idolatrous practices, I don't bow down to the Buddha before, and I don't think about the Buddha, and I don't think about the teachers, and I don't bow down to them, and all this, it's not true. It could be that, again, there's no actual act, But the atmosphere is not one that you want to be in. You don't want to be in this atmosphere. Of course, the opposite is also true. That if a person, and that the Rebbe wrote about in the Yom Yom, a person is walking down the street, he should recite Mishnayos or Tanya or something. He should know something by heart that he can recite. A lot of people know some Tehillim by heart. That also works. And then you change the atmosphere around yourself. Today, you don't need to know anything by heart. You have a phone, and you download an app, and it has all the Torah on it. And if you really want, you can have a class running and speaking as you walk down the street. And if you don't want to bother people, so you have earbuds. And you're walking down the street, and there are words of Torah being said in you and around you. And that itself changes the atmosphere around you.
By the way, I find it very hard to concentrate on Divrei Torah when I'm driving and stuff like that. So I put on Hasidic music because at least the words of the music are words of the Tehillim and other stuff.
Okay.
So that's my...
You can find Tanya set to music. You can find Tehillim set to music, and Shir HaMalos, Shir HaShirim set to music, and all that. In any case, כלפי מה דבריי אמורים. So it says, what am I talking about? אוויר הרחוב בו שוררת הדעה שאין זמננו מתאים לישיבות, השפיע גם חלק מתלמידי הישיבות. So if you have an atmosphere that discounts Torah learning, the atmosphere in the house, you don't have to go so far. He's talking here about, in the 50s, people didn't want to put money aside for yeshivas. They didn't want people to, they didn't think it was important. It says, but what's the atmosphere in your home? Is the atmosphere that when the children come home from school, do they see Torah? Do they hear Torah? What's on the radio? Is it radio or is it a class that's going on? It's always interesting. Everything's interesting. You can hear news and it's entertainment. The Torah classes today are entertainment. They're great. There's people who are really, really talented. They tell jokes in the middle. And it's interesting. And you can always find someone who's interesting. So if you have that on, it's a different atmosphere. It's true that sometimes a child says, I had enough of that in school. But it's not the same, because what we call extracurricular is always more impactful than what you do in school. It's one of the big rules of life. What you do outside of school, 10 minutes of study outside of school are worth 2 hours in school. It's unbelievable. When you have extracurricular activities and they involve some kind of study, it has a pronounced impact on the child much more than school can. Why that is a whole thing. That's why in Israel they have these youth movements, right? Tnuot Noar, like Bnei Akiva and Ezra and this and that, because they know that the non-formal education is far more impressive on the person, on the child, than the formal education. In any case, יש תלמידים וטוענים שקשה להם ללמוד כפי הראוי משום שהם חייבים תחילה להבטיח לעצמם פרנסה. How did this affect people? That they came and said, I can't study properly. They go to yeshiva, but in the back of their minds they have constantly the question, how am I going to make my living when I grow up? And so they don't invest themselves where they are. Right now they're learning Torah. אין הוא מוכשר ללמוד בשווה, משום שרעיונותם מציקים לו במה יפרנס את ילדיו, שהקדוש ברוך הוא ייתן לו לאחר שיגיע לעונת השדוכים ויטפלו בדבר, וימצא את בן זוגו, את בת זוגו, וישתדך, וינשא, ויוולדו לאחר מכן הילדים, בשעה טובה ומוצלחת. כן דואג הוא מה ישאיר להם לאחר 120 שנה, לכן יוצא לרחוב, כוח המכה שלו לפחות יוצא לרחוב, וחושב על תכלית של פרנסה. So these thoughts about how am I going to make a living, and once I'm married, and then I have children, how am I going to support them? And then he goes so far as he thinks, and what am I going to leave them after my 120 years? After I pass away, what am I going to leave them? So what are you thinking about this now? It's like, remember our conversation from 3 years ago, I think. Mm-hmm. I talked to you about apartments for the children. You said to me, what are you talking about? Why are you worried about this? What?
You said
I said that, and you said to me, stop worrying about these things, because you said it in a very nice way. You said you don't know what your kids are going to want to do. So you're thinking about how you're going to support them. Well, be where you are, and concentrate on where you are. Where did yeshiva students get this idea that they have to worry about their parnasa, about their livelihood, when they're 17, 18, 19, 20 years old? Doesn't make sense. He says it comes from the atmosphere on the street. Even though the Friediger Rebbe already said he was able to move the ice, America is frigid. At the end of it, I mean, the relationships between people are frigid. Very hard to get people to actually care about another person. But the Friediger Rebbe worked hard to make it so that at least the ice moved a little. And the Rebbe, I think, broke the ice. He built icebreakers, Chabad houses, which are supposed to be things that create bonds between people. They're supposed to build warmth between people. Nonetheless, הרי יש הבדל ומרחק בקרע בין כשהוא זז לבין היותו רותח והשם אלוקיך ישוכלהו. נוסף לכך נותרו גם שיריים מן העבר והסוג האמור של תלמידים סופג מן השיריים. So he says, still, the coldness is still in the air, and the people are not burning with a desire to be with God. They're burning with a desire still to make parnasa, to make livelihood. So tomorrow we'll continue this also.
Hey David, אין טעם. לא אומרים טעם, היי David.